Eragon is a film that was pushed out as quickly as possible to cash in on the young adult fantasy craze that was dominating Hollywood at the time. In an effort to appeal to the widest audience possible, the film ended up being cliche and boring as a result. Although the film made some money, it received a pretty widespread negative reaction, and it has failed to have an enduring legacy like many other classics of the era. So today, I want to examine the history of this film, and offer some of my thoughts on why Eragon failed to live up to its potential, and where it all went wrong. The story of 2006's Eragon starts all the way back in 2002, when Christopher Paolini published his book by the same name, which he actually began writing at the age of 15. The book would go on to be a bestseller, and be the first installment into a 4-book series known as the Inheritance Cycle. The novels focus on the adventures of a young teenage boy named Eragon, and his dragon, Saphira, as they struggle to overthrow the evil king, Galbatorix. In the year 2004, 20th Century Fox had purchased the rights, and a feature film adaptation was announced. Officially, Jurassic Park 3 writer Peter Buckman has sole writing credits for the film, but Lawrence Koner, Mark Rosenthal, and Jesse Wigato also contributed. Buckman was given sole creative writing credits for the film due to the writing disputes surrounding the WGA and how much each writer contributed to the script. Directing duties landed with Stefan Fangmeyer, who was making his directorial debut with the film, and in fact would end up being the only ever film he has directed as of this video. He is most well known as a visual effects supervisor, working on countless iconic films such as Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, and Twister, to name a few. Originally, Alex Pettyfer was considered for the lead role, but after learning that production would take place in Central Europe, he passed since he had a fear of flying. Ed Spaliers would get the role instead. Additionally, before Jeremy Irons was cast as Brom, both Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart were approached, but they turned it down as they were both starring in X-Men: The Last Stand. Filming took place in August of 2005, shooting on location around Hungary and Slovakia. The picture wrapped a month later in September and was sent off to post-production. By the end of production, the film's budget was estimated to be about $100 million. And that's not including marketing or distribution. The film was released to theaters on December 15th of 2006, to an opening weekend gross of $24 million. It debuted at number 2 in the box office, right behind The Pursuit of Happiness. Throughout its run in the US, it made $75 million, and overseas it made $175 million, for a total worldwide gross of $250 million. A rule of thumb in the industry is that a movie needs to make back at least 2 to 3 times its budget in order to break even. So that meant this film was a modest hit at the box office. Not a box office bomb, but not a runaway success. Additionally, it was far from a critical success. Eragon has a 16% critic and a 46% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, in addition to a 5 out of 10 on IMDb and a 1.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Overall, it was a major failure with critics, general audiences, and fans of the original series. The original plan was to shoot 2 sequels to this film back to back, similar to how the second and third Pirates of the Caribbean were shot. Eragon was being marketed as the first chapter in the Inheritance trilogy, while the books were still being written. Not only did this film not get a sequel, but the Inheritance trilogy turned into a 4-book series instead. The sequels were simply cancelled due to the mediocre box office take and the negative reaction. There was no news on a new Eragon project until recently, when Disney acquired the rights of the series when they bought 20th Century Fox. 2021 marked the 15th anniversary of the first book, and many fans started campaigning for Disney to make a new adaptation of the series. A year later, on July 22nd of 2022, Variety reported that a live-action television series based on Eragon was in very early stages of development at Disney. This time, Paolini would have more creative control as he would be serving as the co-writer of the series. So, there might be hope for this series in the future. But for the time being, all we have is the 2006 film and its poor legacy. Although I don't have any hard evidence to support my thoughts, I'm going to theorize on why this film ended up so bad. I think this is a classic example of studio interference. Just look how quick this film went through development to screen. The rights were bought in 2004, and 2 years later, it was playing in theaters. That's a super short turnaround for a major motion picture like this. Additionally, the actual filming only took a month, which is also pretty quick for a project of this scale. And take the director as another example of this interference. This is a first-time director, which may make him easier to manipulate to the studio's whims, since he doesn't have the status or reputation that an established director would have. And the remnants of studio interference is also felt in the runtime. This movie is 103 minutes, which is way too short of a runtime for what is supposed to be a big fantasy epic. Studios are always pushing filmmakers to cut the runtimes of their movies, so that theaters can fit as many showings as they can into a single day. And then there's the issues of differences between book and screen. A lot of material was left out of the film, particularly surrounding world building, and what we are presented with in this film is the bare essentials so that the story can be told. It seems to be a common problem among big studio-made movies like this one, that the executives behind the scenes think audiences don't like world building and will find it boring or unnecessary, while in my opinion, I think it's the opposite. Even when I see a film based on a pre-existing work I am totally unfamiliar with, I love to learn about the world and the lore. When I watched Warcraft, my favorite part of the movie was the world building, even though I had never played a World of Warcraft game before in my life. Lore and world building is essential to fantasy products like this one, because the small details are what make it different from other similar works. When we just get the base level information, like we do in this adaptation, then it feels shallow and derivative. Not only was so much material left out, but the stuff that was left in was drastically changed. This is the #1 mistake you see happen with book adaptations on the big screen. I talked about this in my Percy Jackson video as well. When you don't respect the source material, it ends up alienating the die-hard book readers that should have been the film's core fan base. All of these factors felt like studio decisions to me, that were made to maximize profits and make sure the movie appeals to the widest audience possible. But in an effort to catch everyone, they drove away the people that they should have been attracting all along. Keep in mind, everything I am about to say is strictly about the movie Eragon, not the book. I have not read the books, so I'm approaching this film as someone who isn't familiar with this world. Additionally, no hate to you if you like this movie, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Honestly, the script for this movie wouldn't be so bad if it was written for an 8th grade English class. Like, if I was a teacher, I would at least give it an A-. Unfortunately, this script was not written for a middle school project, and was in fact written to be a major motion picture. I compare Eragon to an 8th grade assignment so much because that's what it honestly feels like. The script follows Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey so closely that it felt like it was hitting every single benchmark in order to get the highest possible grade. In order to show you what I mean, I'll compare the story beats of Eragon to another film that follows the hero's journey to a T, and that's Star Wars. Or you can also follow along with The Force Awakens, since it's basically the same movie. Or you can also follow along with Hidden Fortress, since it's the blueprint for Star Wars. You know what? Just pick any movie at random, and there's a high chance you can also follow along. Alright class, get out your pen and paper because this is a hero's journey crash course. Ready? The story opens with a princess running away and hiding a valuable asset that has the potential to stop the evil authoritarian government. It lands in the hands of an unassuming young farm boy protagonist who lives with his uncle who was always destined for something more. The protagonist gets the call to adventure but initially denies it, until the evil bad guys find and kill the protagonist's only family. He gets supernatural aid from an older mentor figure that is well versed in the new world that the protagonist has been introduced to. The protagonist crosses the threshold and leaves his village to start his great quest, running into trials and tribulations along the way. During these trials, we get glimpses into the great hidden power that the protagonist never knew he had. Then, we get the midpoint of the story, aka the innermost cave, aka the abyss, aka death and rebirth. The protagonist goes into the villain's lair to save the princess, but the older mentor is killed in the process. After reaching his lowest point, the protagonist goes through revelation and transformation. He delivers the princess to her secret hidden world and is introduced to all these new allies. The protagonist thinks he has learned his lesson and is ready to go into the fight with renewed confidence. The protagonist beats the evil force using what he learned about his newfound skills. But he doesn't kill the main bad guy because, sequels and shit. Once the day is saved, he returns home, ready to start his next adventure. And thus concludes our lesson. The test will be next week, so make sure you study. This is a story you've probably seen thousands of times, because the hero's journey is the foundation for countless adventure stories. In particular, stories that have the chosen one trope. The main thing that separates Eragon from other hero's journey stories is that Eragon goes about telling this story in such a boring and lazy fashion. This is one of those movies where the characters spend 90% of the time standing around and talking about stuff, and then 10% of the time actually doing stuff. There's no nuance to how this film delivers its exposition, and it's so boring. A perfect example would be how this movie tells us the lore about the Dragon Riders. It is spoon-fed to us by one character simply monologuing to another character. It reminds me of two other movies that do the exact same thing: The Fellowship of the Ring and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. These movies have extensive exposition and lore dumps, just like how Eragon doesn't. But they were portrayed in flashback and storybook mode, where we can physically see the people, places, and things that the narrator is talking about. This is something that Eragon does in the beginning of the film, and it's effective, but it's very brief and never done again. I really like the one in the Deathly Hallows because we get some cool animation that makes the information way more interesting than just a character standing and delivering it to us. I'm not saying Eragon should have done something exactly like this, but they should have at least tried to break up the monotony at which the exposition was portrayed. Not only is the plot so boring, basic, and by the numbers, but the characters are too. Look at the movies I have already referenced, Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings, where characters have personality traits that make them unique. In this movie, we just get surface-level archetypes which do their job to make the plot move along and nothing else. The princess has no defining character traits, and we basically learn nothing about her. John Malkovich's character just sits on a throne the entire time doing jack diddly squat, and then there's characters that don't even affect the plot at all, like this guy. Apparently his name is Murtagh. I get he was probably there to set stuff up in the sequels that never happened, but they should have at least had him do something important so he wasn't utterly useless in this movie. I couldn't even tell you what these characters' names are without looking them up. That's how memorable they are. I would probably forget Eragon's name too if it wasn't the title of the movie. Eragon also lacks the scale and adventure of other fantasy movies. In Lord of the Rings, we have all these memorable locations that look aesthetically different, and the landscape changes as the heroes go on their journey, so it feels like there's been some progress. In Eragon, there's so many scenes that happen in these wooded areas that all look identical, so it feels like the characters haven't traveled outside this forest. One might say that this is a byproduct of the budget, which I agree with to some extent, but I don't think it should totally excuse this film. For example, if you look at the budget for Fellowship of the Ring, it is actually $7 million less than what this abomination cost. Let that sink in. This movie cost more than this movie. I know that this comparison isn't entirely fair since all the Lord of the Rings movies were shot back to back, and the production of those movies had a lot of smart cost-cutting measures, but the point I'm trying to make is that you can make a movie of this scale look good even if you don't have an Avengers level budget. All things considered, I think the dragon in this movie looks pretty solid, but that's the bare minimum since this movie is all about the dragon, and the director has an extensive background in special effects. A lot of the production design, costumes, and locations feel very lackluster for a high fantasy epic. I love that this film was shot in real locations, but it seems like the movie went for a more realistic look when they should have been going for a more fantastical look. But that's just my opinion. Finally, the last thing I wanted to point out is the acting. I'll keep it brief since I don't like making fun of child actors, but it simply wasn't the best. I believe this is a result of the poor script and an inexperienced director, not the actors themselves. From the beginning, this movie had too many factors working against it, and it's a shame that the end result was so atrocious. Alright, I got it all out of my system. I think I'm done making fun of this movie. Eragon is a movie that decided to boil down the source material to its surface level content in order to make the most generic and basic fantasy movie possible. Not only did this piss off fans of the source material, but it also bored critics and audiences who are not even familiar with the books. From the script to the production design to the acting, every aspect of this film is weak. And that's why this film failed. It's weak, cliche, and forgettable. But what are your thoughts on Eragon? Have you read the books? Did you like it? Hate it? Do you even remember this film? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Also, just as a fun fact before we end the video that I couldn't fit anywhere else, Eragon was the last major film to be released on VHS in the United States before the format was discontinued. What a way to go out. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.